Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining, and so happy to see so many of you. Maybe I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Francesca Raffetti, working for Climate Action Network International. And as I was saying, it's a pleasure to see so many of you in this session, which is aimed to be a short session dedicated at taking a bit stock of where we are on the just transition within the UNFCCC process since last year, and then focusing in particular on what is at stake at Bonn in the climate negotiations at Bonn to really ensure that we are on the right track to deliver an innovative and ambitious plan. Maybe a few words about how the session will go. As you have seen from the invites, it's a short session, and it's intentionally so. So we'll have a 20-minute presentation by Annabella. That is also from CAN International, and then we'll open the floor if we have time for a couple of questions or comments. But yes, just to reaffirm, it's mainly a bit of a space that we wanted to open to share our reflections on what we've been seeing and what we are expecting to see this year. But with that, I then immediately pass the word to you, Anna.
Thank you, Francesca. A pleasure to see many friends in this brief, and I'm sure there are so many of you that could be doing this brief. So a lot of nervousness, I guess, of sharing the platform with so many experts. But as Fra said, this is an opportunity just to summarize a bit of where we are, where is the landscape on just transition before going to the SDs. So I'm going to be sharing with you my screen. Give me 1 second because we prepared a little presentation for you. Here you go. Let me just check. I always struggle to move stuff. There you are. So first, we don't want to assume that we all share our definitions of just transition. And in CAN, we always start acknowledging where this concept is coming from. This is not just two words that have randomly come together. It has a long history, in particular situated in the union movement in the United States. In, of course, a pretty interesting context, which was one of blackmailing workers against environmental protections. And that concept has followed a very long and interesting road to get into the international sphere. We also go, of course, we also take just transition as an approach to things. So within that history, and is one that speaks to how we do the transformations that are associated with climate, and in particularly doing it in a way that centers the needs of workers, communities, indigenous peoples, and many other groups in the front lines of change. That said, we also know that a majority of countries in the world, even when willing to secure those rights, the ability that they have to do so is currently undermined by their situation in the global division of labor. Most of them have been built up to just do exports, in particular commodity exports are very often extractive-based exports. They are stricken by debt, most of them pushed into austerity and also unfairly impacted by climate. So just transition then emerges in that context as an alternative pathway for prosperity and is not exclusively related to climate action. So when we move all of this into the UNFCCC, just transition captures domestic rights and policies alongside a global justice approach that is engaging also on all the enablers and the disenablers for a just transition, and in particular in bringing together objectives that are 1.5 and the Paris Agreement alongside other social and economic priorities. We don't have good news very often in the climate space, but I guess just transition was one of those. an unprecedented mobilization from civil society that included unions and feminist groups and youth and social movements, pushed COP to agree on a decision that we think it was a real breakthrough. First, on the qualitative aspects of the decision when it comes to identifying key principles that need to be used when just transition is referenced or mobilized, including issues related to just transition being deployed in all aspects of climate policy. So it's as much for energy as it is for agriculture and food systems, as it is for adaptation, as it is, for other features of the conversation. It needs to be based on rights, and the text is extremely rich on the specific rights that we are referring to, whether it's human rights, labor rights, but also rights of specific right holders. There is also a very good text on indigenous peoples' rights that go well beyond the usual references. And it also makes very clear that just transition requires the inclusion of those right holders. Some are mentioned in a COP decision for the very first time, like Afro-descendants and peoples with disabilities. And it also makes very clear that just transition, as I was saying a second ago, is not only a national endeavor. It requires international cooperation, and that comes with appropriate financing and addressing some of the major global challenges that are preventing a just transition. And of course, in our platform as civil society, we wanted both. We wanted the principles, and we also wanted an operationalization approach to them, which was the mechanism, our BAM, that now we have played a little bit with the acronym, so it becomes the Belem-Antalya Mechanism, so that we have a vehicle to make these principles, all of them, come to life. And of course, we linked in the presentation that we're going to be sharing with you the decision itself. But what is this BAM that is still to be developed? I mean, the decision from the COP makes only a commitment to develop, but everything is still to be decided. So BAM is this global piece for making just transition happen. It's not the only thing that just transition needs, but at the global level, we are convinced that this is one that is missing. And why do we need it? I guess you all come from different parts of life and just transition work. If there is one thing that there's not a single practitioner on just transition would contradict, is the fact that today just transition is a very fragmented and siloed landscape. It lacks also very often a common framework and vocabulary that hopefully now also with the COP30 decision, we have more grounds for that convergence, but there is no sufficient coordination, and there are huge gaps when it comes to finance, or between the finance we have and the needs that are there in capacity and in cooperation. And there is also very weak integration between climate objectives and other social and economic priorities, which is what just transition can bring about. In addition to, we need a BAM because there are all these bad things going on. From our perspective, BAM can become potentially the most consequential decision for global climate governance since Paris, because it opens the door for a different kind of action by the COP, built on consensus, but being much more on a role of enabling ambition and justice. Whether we are thinking about the transitioning away from fossil fuels, changes in agriculture and food systems, deforestation, climate impacts, value chain addition, industrialization, energy access, just transition allows us to connect these different conversations in a way that centers prosperity and dignity for all. In Bonn, then, which is a very peculiar place, this is where draft decisions in the UNFCCC process start. And basically it provides, like, when good text is there, maybe 80% of what ends up being agreed at COP. And last year gives us a very good example of the kind of process we need this year as well. So we wanted to use it a little bit as a model, because last year we got early in the process co-facilitators providing a draft structure to guide the discussions. So this year, we would expect a structure that would contain a section on key just transition messages coming from the different dialogues, which has had one on food and agriculture. We might have another one on industry. Also, a section that would speak to the review of the Just Transition Work Program that is due this year, and hopefully a lot of dedicating time to the development of the Just Transition Mechanism, as it was agreed in COP30. Then, very likely, co-facilitators could bring new ideas from the floor and in-session submissions from parties, and then the informal notes that gets forwarded to COP. Very important also for Bonn is that it should help us elevate a bit more just transition and BAM as a key negotiated outcome for COP31, articulating also how it connects to realities and the moments in which we are. So when we think about that text and which are the elements that should be in the decision about this new just transition mechanism, there are things that were already agreed at the COP, in particular when it comes to the purpose of the mechanism. And we copied them there. So it's to enhance international cooperation, technical assistance, capacity building, and knowledge sharing. And very important, enable equitable, inclusive transitions based on the definitions that were definitions of principles that were also contained in that decision. So we know, as any other institutional vehicle created at the COP, it will have several dimensions, and the decision will have to contain some of those. The purpose, that was more or less agreed, but then functions, modalities, and in some cases it contains activities as examples. We do not think we are going to go that far, but who knows? The CAN proposal on this mechanism is still shaping up. It has kept being shaped also by our exchanges with multiple other constituencies. But we have been sharing since last year the importance of key functions of this mechanism being around coordination, about knowledge sharing and generation, and support. But there are many views about how this could materialize in the UNFCCC. So we added there also a link to different submissions and the 18 public hearings we organized on the Just Transition Mechanism, which are amazing contributions from all sort of experts on how this mechanism could shape up. A bit on our side, our perspective is that only a very innovative and ambitious BAM would be able to deliver impact. So we are putting a very high threshold on how this mechanism should be shaping up. We are expecting quite messy negotiations, of course, but we think we have to keep the eyes on a few goals that need to be scrutinized. There are some that are quite consensual, like knowledge generation, coordination, space for capacity building. Our take is that we need to keep the eyes on these other aspects because those define, to a certain extent, how far the mechanism would go in its implementation mandate. So one is the connection and mandate to support what has been agreed already at COP30. So we should not be starting from scratch. This mechanism is to deliver on what was agreed and keep growing that sense of key messages coming from conversations. The second element, and it's crucial, is to what extent this mechanism will mobilize support for just transition strategies at different levels. And this includes mobilizing resources, just transition finance, and also engage on some of these global barriers for the transition, what we're calling the disenablers, whether we're talking about debt or we're talking about different aspects not supporting technology transfer, they should be discussed there. A third element is the governance that will give this mechanism, we put it there, entity or agency. So the ability to go out and bring and fetch those that can come into the conversation. So this implies some form of technical representative body, but then a much more open space that allows practitioners to come in, set the agenda, and that could be leveraged by the communities that are in the transition space and have a lot to say. And today we know the UNFCCC is not the most welcoming space for those experiences. Of course, we are going to be watching also the role that is given, or we are going to take as constituency observers, and the extent to which public participation is possible, and how we can accelerate the setup of this mechanism. Because if there's only one conversation per year, this is going to take ages, and there is a real urgency to make just transition happening on the ground. And so based on previous experiences, the idea of a very short-lived transitional group that would accelerate the setup of BAM could be considered. Just to mention a couple of tensions without going into naming specific countries, there is a lot of diversity, to say the least, on what parties expect from just transition in the UNFCCC, with some countries being very clear on the fact that for them, just transition is an inspiring, forward-looking, new building block, and others trying to limit the reach as much as possible. It's like a sort of, okay, we have to deal with this thing, but it's one in a long list, and we would prefer to be focusing on more traditional approaches. So that's a clear tension. The second one is about governance. So there are things that just transition needs, and then there is what parties are ready to accept in the UNFCCC. And that is not going to be easy to navigate, as I said, in a space with such a level of fragmentation as the one we have shown on just transition. We need an entity that is able to reach out to others, that is able to convene others. It cannot just be a list of activities. But then there are the constraints and the so-called red lines from parties on what they are ready to accept as new institutions in that space. The third element is how we move from a quite general consensus on functions to giving this body real capabilities to do these functions. And as a last one is that we need, in the context of all these framings and letters from the presidency, we need a better articulation of BAM in the context of this implementation COP. COP should not be only about announcements. It's a negotiating process. It's about building consensus in, of course, an extremely complicated context, but we are convinced that just transition gives the space for agreement, despite the context in which we are. So a couple of final thoughts. Just transition, and we've been repeating this over and over, give us the possibility to recenter climate on people, on justice, on the changes that are needed out there. And it gives us also the possibility for countries to start integrating different priorities, because of course climate is incredibly important, but we also know there are other social and economic priorities out there, and we would win in having those integrated strategies, those conversations about how we connect the dots, instead of pretending that ambition is going to come out of the blue. The second one is that it allows us also to connect to the day-to-day experiences and aspirations of people, which remain, of course, having a safe environment and a healthy environment in which they can live, but also it's about feeding their families and have a decent life and have some time for leisure. Having a dignified living. So just transition gives us that chance to tell a different story of how climate can enable that. And finally, advancing on just transition and the BAM in particular could give us a possibility to show that multilateralism is oriented towards people at a time where so much is about war and about aggression and about violence. We can keep showing that there is an anomaly in the system, one where countries are still willing to cooperate. And in doing so, by advancing just transition, we might be able to grow also support for bigger change. So I'm going to stop there. As we said, it's not like, it's a format that doesn't allow like a lot of questions and answers. But of course, we are here now, but also you can reach out to us and to all our coordination we're doing with different civil society actors, to keep the conversation going. Over, Frank.
Thank you so much, Anna. There are already a couple of questions in the chat actually that I'll read out, but I also wanted to share, I forgot to mention at the beginning that the recording and the slides will indeed be shared with all the participants that registered. So in terms of questions, we have one from Sasa Emmanuel James. How can governments and international community ensure that women, youth, people with disabilities, and indigenous people are not left behind in this transition? And then there are a series of questions more about the BAM and the negotiations. Maybe starting with, will the BAM be discussed exclusively under the Just Transition Work Program in Bonn? And how can countries that never participated at Just Transition discussion access the work program and those discussions? And maybe following with the one from Javier, at this point, it is important that we have concrete examples of what kind of actions we want the BAM to be able to do for our advocacy, so how to go about it. And I'll read a final one for now, and then if we have more time, maybe Anna can sneak in another answer. On the connection with Santa Marta, so will the role of or parts of the Santa Marta's People Declaration, what will the role of that be in Bonn?
Thanks all for all these questions. And as I said, there are so many experts also in the call that even some that are asking questions could also answer the questions. So I appreciate also the the possibility. So I guess the one from Emmanuel, I mean, like, how can governments and international community ensure the inclusion of all these different groups? I think a first step was taken with the COP decision last year that at least recognizes all those groups. Now, what they need to do is agree on how concretely they are going to support them and give them a voice. At the global level for the mechanism, it means, I mean, like making a real effort so that those resources go to the ground and also give them a seat in decision making. And that is going to be a big thing and difficult thing to win when it comes to the BAM. But it's one of these innovative aspects that we're really pushing parties very, very hard on. We need to have a new governance if we want to have different results. On where BAM is going to be discussed, BAM is formally, I mean, the decision to develop a mechanism has been agreed within the Just Transition Work Program. Our expectation is that that continues probably under that line, but it's going to be a decision from the co-facilitators if they want to have different rooms on this and basically have one track that is only following on the mechanism and the rest of the decision. My gut feeling is that there are parties that are not very interested in having a fully fledged BAM, that will just want to contain BAM within the Just Transition Work Program agenda item. What I don't know is how fast we are going to go on that procedural discussion. Hopefully, the co-facilitators are going to find a way that gets us fast into the actual content discussion. And parties, irrespective of how much they've engaged or not on this, are all welcome in the contact group, and so are observers. This is also a very open space for following the negotiations compared with other discussions. On the examples, I think the we can also share some of the examples that were produced in the brief we did last year with the Women and Gender constituency as CAN, where we gave some examples of, okay, if a country, I mean, like, needs this kind of support, they can get to the mechanism. Their needs could be matched by experts that are sitting in the BAM because they are part of this practitioner group. There are also opportunities to make a connection between needs and those that can support. We could also see value in countries getting support for building up their strategies. We could imagine also, I mean, over time, the possibility for communities addressing also different proposals, concerns that they are going through in their just transition strategies in exchange with others. So many ideas. In the end, what we need is a home that can bring a lot of this that is happening in very multiple small places all around to the same place. Also as a way, hopefully, to grow the amount of support that is going to just transition strategies that we know for the time being is extremely limited. So by profiling it more, by building a constituency of just transition practitioners and right holders, we are also trying to send a signal to the multilateral space that this is a place worth investing and supporting on. And then final one on the connection to the transitioning away from fossil fuels. So of course, the just transition community was very active in the Santa Marta process, in particular on the People's Declaration, which contains important aspects of just transition that social movements have been mobilizing on. And although we were quite happy of that product, we were not very happy with the way in which just transition is covered yet in the Santa Marta process. We are told that this is, of course, an ongoing process. It's the beginning. But we absolutely need just transition to be a centerpiece of a transitioning away from fossil fuels. In the context of UNFCCC, as you know, Santa Marta is not officially connected. What we are talking about is more a potential connection to the TAF roadmap, which is also in conversations. Because TAF roadmap was not a COP decision, it was an initiative by the presidency. In the end, I think what is important for us is just to keep the connection also in our heads. For the transitioning away from fossil fuels, as much as for the other transitions, we need a very strong enabling support institution that is this ban. And that will also accelerate the transition away from fossil fuels. So we need ban for TAF. And then we are also, as Can, very hopeful that the conversation around transitioning away from fossil fuels and the roadmaps that need to be developed are also going to be captured in the COP process. But that's a bit of a separate conversation in which I'm sure colleagues from Can and the whole community working on transitioning away would have probably much more expert opinions on how that translates in Bonn.
Thank you, Anna. We're at the top of the half an hour, but I see the last question that came in is actually worth answering because it's more about engaging people, which is how can we engage people and civil society ahead of, during, and post this for ban?
So yeah, let us know. We are building a mailing list. We are trying to go far beyond the usual suspects on the just transition conversation. Our belief is that this issue allows to pull a thread over so many social movements and civil society needs and priorities. So yeah, well, as people that registered in this webinar, you are going to hear from us. But we are also going to be organizing much more open spaces like the Just Transition Rising, very likely, in September, so in the second half of the year, where it's going to be much more of a convergent space for people to think about how we move Just Transition together and keep strengthening this social movement for just change that we are pushing. So stay tuned. Reach out to us if you're not getting emails, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, with that, we reached the end of the session. So once again, just thank you all for the interest, for joining, and yeah, we'll keep in touch. Thank you very much.
Bye everyone.